On the outskirts of a small town stood an abandoned house that had been frightening the locals with its sinister appearance for decades. This house had a gloomy facade, creaking shutters, and seemed to always hide in shadows, even on the sunniest days. Everyone knew that this house was once built by a local builder named Hnat Kovalenko. However, its history was full of mysteries that only intensified the ominous atmosphere surrounding the building. Hnat was a master of his craft, and there wasn't a single building in the town that hadn't been touched by his hands. He could transform any piece of land into a masterpiece. But over time, people began to avoid him. They said Hnat had become strange, his eyes always holding some inexplicable knowledge, and his hands seemed to bear an invisible burden. He was a tall and gaunt man, with a face framed by deep wrinkles that seemed to carve out years of hard work and unspoken anxieties. His hair, dark but streaked with gray, was always carelessly combed, and his thick eyebrows cast shadows over his piercing eyes. His skin was pale, as if he rarely saw the sun, and his hands were rough, covered in calluses and scars, evidence of years of labor. He began building his last house, hoping to create the perfect place to live, one that embodied his dreams and aspirations. It was meant to be a home where he would finally find peace and leave his mark on the world, but this very ambition became the cause of his downfall. This house was supposed to be his masterpiece. Hnat worked tirelessly. At night, the light from his lamp could be seen, and the sounds of hammering and sawing didn't stop, even at dawn. He refused help from other craftsmen, explaining that only he knew how to properly realize the vision. It seemed his obsession with the house exceeded all reasonable limits. He stopped sleeping, eating, and even interacting with people. He could always be seen at work, either carving details or measuring every millimeter as if trying to achieve some ideal that existed only in his mind. His whispers, which echoed through the night, sometimes sounded like a conspiracy or a prayer addressed to something unknown. Neighbors claimed they heard him murmuring while he worked. But what frightened them most were the sounds emanating from the unfinished house that no one could explain. A rumble, like an echo, as if something heavy was moving inside, or sudden bangs, as if someone were breaking through the walls. Sometimes, it even seemed as though faint voices were coming from the house, arguing or crying for help, even though everyone knew Hnat worked alone. When the construction was finished, the house looked as though it had been plucked from the worst human nightmares. Its architecture was bizarre, with distorted angles that defied the laws of geometry. The doors seemed too tall, while the windows were strangely small. But the most unsettling thing was that the house made sounds, creaks, groans, and even faint, barely audible voices that sent chills down one's spine. Hnat moved in alone. No one saw him during the day, but at night neighbors noticed shadows moving behind the windows, though they knew the builder couldn't possibly be in several rooms at once. People began saying the house was draining his life. They told stories of how, whenever Hnat worked inside, strange noises came from his room, as if the walls were coming to life and sapping his strength. Neighbors noticed that over time he became more ghost-like. His movements grew weak, his voice turned to a whisper, and his eyes became hollow, as if the house was absorbing his energy, leaving only a shell. Dark stains began appearing on the walls of the house, resembling blurred silhouettes, and people believed these were reflections of Hnat's soul, gradually taken over by the house. Indeed, over time, Hnat looked increasingly emaciated, his eyes sunken, and his skin gray, like ash. One night, during a fierce storm, a few daredevils, including local youths and an older man, decided to enter the house to find out what was happening. They carried lanterns casting dim yellow light and nervously whispered as they approached the door. One of them boldly pushed the door, which opened easily, as if the house itself was inviting them inside. The moment they crossed the threshold, the door suddenly slammed shut with such force that the entire house seemed to shake, and silence fell outside. The silence was broken by a horrifying scream that seemed to come from all directions at once. The lanterns went out, and those people were never seen again. Neighbors heard the scream, which woke everyone up. They saw the house seemingly come to life. The windows glowed with an eerie red light, and the roof emitted piercing sounds like roaring. When it all subsided, Hnat was never seen again. The townsfolk gathered to inspect the house, but even approaching it felt terrifying. People stood at a distance, nervously glancing at the windows, which seemed to watch them. The door was locked, and no one dared to break it, feeling fear tighten around their throats. A few brave souls stepped forward but immediately retreated after hearing a strange creak, as if the house was warning them. Eventually, one of the elders suggested leaving it alone to avoid bringing misfortune. Since then, the house has stood abandoned, but the legend of Hnat and his eerie creation lived on in everyone's heart. Some said the builder's soul remained in the house forever, while others believed he had become part of it. Yet, from time to time, someone passing by would notice a faint light in the window or hear a quiet whisper that sent shivers down their spine. And although the town grew, no one dared to demolish or move into the house, which stood like a monument to someone's incomprehensible and terrifying obsession. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel.